We now have the results from the first question that we asked at the top of the program. So let's see what our audience today has said. The question was, treating cancer with surgery can cause it to spread throughout the body. From our interactive audience today, the results are, no one agrees strongly with that statement. 17% somewhat agree, 17% somewhat disagree, 67% strongly disagree, and 1% say they don't know. Now, let's see how that compares with our previous poll that Burwood conducted. The responses from that survey were 14% strongly agreed, 23% somewhat agreed, 21% somewhat disagreed, and 27% strongly disagreed, and 16% actually didn't know in that formulation. Now, I should say that the correct answer is that treating cancer with surgery does not cause it to spread throughout the body. Burwood, any comments you want to make about the survey results?
Well, clearly your viewers are more knowledgeable than Central Pennsylvania residents as a whole. So that's a positive thing, and hopefully this effort will make them more knowledgeable.
Well, certainly our participants today in the webinar include our partners and friends throughout the community. So I think we absolutely do have an elevated level of knowledge here, which we hope, with working with all of you, to transfer to the broader community. We've talked a little bit about research and promising areas of research. That leads, of course, to treatment options. And I've heard, I think, each of you at previous times talk about bringing treatment down to the individual level, that my treatment for a particular kind of cancer would be entirely different or somewhat different from treatment of the same cancer in another person. How exactly does that work, Dr. Hempling?
Well, it doesn't work all the time currently. I don't think at this time we have enough knowledge to do that for every patient that walks in the door who has been diagnosed. However, we are approaching what's called targeted therapy based upon the molecular genetics and characteristics of an individual tumor and looking at that lesion with a host of markers that tell us what therapy will be most effective for that given malignancy. For the most part, we have been successful in those endeavors, but they are, as is the genetics of cancer itself, in its infancy. We still rely in large measure upon the three modalities that we have used for the last 75 to 100 years, and those are surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation in the treatment of this disease. We are more successful than we used to be.
Indeed. One of the things that I think the general public and patients are always aware of and are perhaps impatient about is the pace of treatment improvements. But the trajectory of research and treatment can be quite long. Dr. Royer, since some individualized treatment for down to that cell level is beginning to occur, do you have a prediction on how long it might take for it to be a widespread practice for cancer treatment?
Well, I think that that's something that is actually being looked at in clinical trials, that as we're better focused on what the target is, what's gone wrong in a given type of cancer, if we find something that's able to fix that abnormality to make a cell better, it should be a shorter time between the time that that is introduced to the market and available for patients. So we do think that with some improvements in the clinical trial enterprise overall, that there will be a shortened time between the laboratory bench and availability of new treatments.
Not infrequently, and I'm certainly ready to discuss whether or not I'm accurate, not infrequently stated that from concept to market for a new therapeutic modality to arrive takes at least a decade, which leaves those clinicians who are treating patients tapping their feet and asking for a more rapid approval process. Not necessarily the approval process that keeps things back, but the amount of research that goes into demonstrating that what we are going to do will be helpful rather than harmful.
And doesn't treatment pace depend upon the availability of clinical trials to test new modalities, new treatments?
Yes.
Yes, it does, and that's why we think that it is important to make clinical trials the standard of care. At Lancaster General, we participate with the Abramson Cancer Center at the University of Pennsylvania to make sure that people do have that knowledge and that access so that we think that for the first time, people may actually benefit themselves from enrolling into a clinical trial. In the past, you were enrolling in a clinical trial to help medical science, to try something because your treatment hadn't worked. Now we're identifying up front, you may be the kind of person who has the target, and there's a very big experience in that with a type of leukemia where we know precisely what went wrong. We were able to fix that, and almost everybody who participated in the first clinical trial got into remission within a month or two in a leukemia which was previously incurable.
Let me augment Dr. Royer's statement. The importance of clinical trials in the community can't be overstated. About 5% of all patients who are diagnosed with a malignancy participate in some sort of clinical trial. That means that 95% do not. The number is woefully inadequate. If we consider that 1.5 million new cases of cancer will be diagnosed in 2011, the potential for evaluating new therapeutic modalities among 1.5 million patients versus 5% of 1.5 million patients can't be overstated. We are hampered in some areas in that some patients simply are not candidates. We are hampered in some areas by compensation. But those are barriers that I think we need to work very hard as a community to overcome for our patients in this region.
Now, of course, there are treatment trials, and that's what you're referring to here, but there are also preventative trials and other trials that are testing other aspects.
Right, and I think all of us here at the table participate in clinical trials and research at the community level, and 20 years ago, if you wanted to participate in a clinical trial, you would have to probably go to Philadelphia or Baltimore, but you don't have to do that anymore. These trials are available in the community here. I think what oftentimes would be of a help were the clinicians, when they're talking to patients, letting them know that there's a clinical trial available for them in their community so that they can have access to it. And I think sometimes that comes from the clinician themselves, not only patients. So I think it's a broader aspect that we have to look at and really work with people to see the value of clinical trials. All of us here believe in research. And for a variety of reasons, but you have to convince other people that it is a worthwhile endeavor to go forward with, not only the patients, but the physicians they work with.
Burwood, we didn't ask about clinical trials in our particular research, but perhaps from your other research you have some data on people's willingness to participate?
I don't have any data on that. That's certainly something that we could look up.
That's on our to-do list.
We should put that on our list, certainly.
Okay.
Certainly. One thing I would say, though, is from our survey that we found was that people don't seem to realize the resources available in the area. A lot of patients told us that they would go elsewhere if they were diagnosed with cancer. And I think that reflects a lack of understanding about the care and competent care that they can get here, and is certainly something that I think this campaign needs to address.
Go ahead.
I agree with all of the comments. A stark contrast, I think, is between pediatric oncology and adult oncology. Almost 90% of pediatric or childhood cancers are curable, and we think that that comes as a direct line of sight from the fact that 90% of pediatric cancer patients are enrolled on clinical trials. As has been said, it is woefully inadequate in adult oncology, and this is really a national crisis that only 5% of people are enrolled in clinical trials. So we are looking for that answer. We need our patients to participate.